believe that our state forest should be open to hiking and to hunting and to whatever people want to use it for, recreation. We know that at least in our state parks, for every dollar that's invested in our state parks, it's a $10 return, a $9 to $10 return. So there's money to be made for, it's a huge economic driver. There's money to be made without necessarily opening up our last pristine areas for this drilling. And the reason that we're concerned is this is not your typical shallow gas well. This is a gas well that requires 8 to 9 acres on average per well pad, with maybe 5 or 6 wells on each pad. And that's including the roads, that's including the open, just the space that's needed for the wastewater impoundments, all the actual drilling well, the wells themselves, any processing plants, and that's actually excluding pipelines. If there's a pipeline that's going in that disrupts the surface, certainly for a period of time, and that prevents any kind of building or anything from going on top of that in the future. So some major concerns about our public lands. Unfortunately, when it comes to state parks, it's not as easy to just place a moratorium on drilling in state parks like it is with state forests. So I think that the work that our group and other groups are trying to do is to make it as difficult as possible, create as many hurdles as possible to drilling in our state parks, so that places like Ohio Pile and just wonderful, wonderful places that we like to visit are not diminished, in the long term for a short term, what we see as a short-term gain. Now, you might not think about air quality when it comes to drilling or when it comes to natural gas, because I think as a lot of people, as I thought before I learned about this issue, and a lot of people think in their heads, oh, it's cleaner burning, it's a cleaner form of energy, it's cleaner than coal. Well, the tailpipe emissions, if you're using a natural gas powered car, the tailpipe emissions might be cleaner, but the way that it's done right now, the extraction process, the processing process is actually not so clean when it comes to air emissions. At different parts of extraction and production, there are pretty harmful emissions that can leak out and escape into our atmosphere. Some of them cause health concerns. So volatile organic compounds is something that the EPA itself has recognized as a major issue. They've introduced proposed rules to cut down on all of these emissions listed here. VOCs can lead to smog. And in places like Pittsburgh area, southwestern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and then other places around the state, we're already at or above our allowable limit for smog pollution. So we really can't afford any new sources of pollution that would cause smog. We already have, I live in Pittsburgh. Southwestern Pennsylvania has some of the worst air quality in the country, even though it's improved a lot over the last 50 to 100 years. Still too many kids with asthma going to the hospital way too often. So that's a major concern here. Another is just air toxics. Benzene, ethylbenzene, like I said, if in the process of compressing this gas, making it ready for market, this leaks it all, which we know from studies that it does in some cases, that can pose an immediate health threat to people living in close proximity to these areas. And because these plants are often in residential neighborhoods, at least what we've seen in southwestern PA, up in northeastern Pennsylvania, there are people living in close proximity to these plants. And then methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. So when people are talking about, oh, is this better for the environment? Is this better for stopping climate change than coal? Well, if methane is allowed to leak, methane is 20 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So any little methane leak here and there is really going to add up to be a potent greenhouse gas. And then the last issue is water use. This process uses a lot of water. Each time a well is hydraulically fractured, uses 2 to 6 million gallons of water. The easiest way to get that water is to look to a local water source, like a stream or a river, and that's often what they do. In the Susquehanna River Basin, where we are here in the Delaware River Basin out east, they need special permission. Well, Delaware River is a separate issue. They have put their whole basin off limits to drilling for the time being, and that's good for now. They're taking the right approach, which is let's study it, let's come up with the right rules, and we hope that they actually do that. In the Susquehanna River Basin, companies have to apply for permits to withdraw water from the Susquehanna River, and the River Basin Commission is meant to manage the water quality and the quantity that's withdrawn. But when you're talking about a little waterway, that can make a huge impact on aquatic life, on the quality of the river. If there's less water there, any pollution is just more concentrated. This has gotten a little bit better since the policy that I mentioned has gone into place that restricted the wastewater discharges into waterways. It sort of forced the hand of industry to start to reuse water, which they've done a little bit. There have been some plants that have been built that wastewater can be sent to be minimally processed and then used in subsequent wells for hydraulic fracturing. So that's helped some, but still there is fresh water that's constantly needed for this process, and it's a lot of water. So that's a question. I mean, if this industry grows to, drill, well, we're at 9,000 leased right now. If it grows to 20,000, 50,000 is the high mark of where we heard it could go in the next 2 decades. What does that mean for our waterways and the use of water? So with PennEnvironment, our goal, we want to stop this dangerous drilling as it's done today. If there could be some way that it could be done with zero health effects, zero environmental effects, we take a look at that. But as it's done today, we at least need, we believe, a pause in this drilling to allow rules to catch up, environmental laws to catch up, to allow enforcement staff to grow along with the industry. So that's our position. There are a lot of different positions out there. Some people think, okay, let's just work, that's never going to happen, so let's just work to regulate, and we're all about that too. So that's why we have short-term policy goals, and I'm going to walk through very quickly. At the same time, we want to be passing the right rules and regulations to make sure that this is, the Oil and Gas Act, for instance, is caught up to where it needs to be. So our strategy, which is why we're holding these sessions, is we need ongoing public pressure and scrutiny to convince decision makers to take action. People power. That's what groups like us are about. We're a member-based group. We want to engage the public, make sure that the public is ready to speak out and take action if they want to. So on clean water, it's about setting withdrawal limits, reporting requirements on wastewater disposal, making sure that the protective buffer zone around streams and drinking water is expanded from 100 feet to what we're saying is at least 5,000 feet. When it comes to open space, there's just certain places that should be off limits to gas drilling. Some places that are just too pristine, too important ecologically, too important economically, whatever the criteria is, we know there are places that should be off limits to drilling. Certainly in public lands like forests and parks, and then probably other places beyond that. Improving the public's right to know. I mean, we want the public, and not just environmental regulators, but the public to have easy access to the specific types and volumes of chemicals used at each well. This is important so that if you own, let's say that drilling is coming into your area, you have your own private water well, you want to get it tested beforehand so that if anything happens to your water, you know that you have the proof there that it was not there beforehand, and you can take them to court, and you can use the law, the court, and to get them to pay the repairs. You need to know what types of chemicals to test for, because testing for all 85 chemicals costs thousands of dollars. People really have to guess right now as to which chemicals to test for. So knowing the specific types of chemicals is very important. Also, then we think that that sunshine is the best disinfectant, and that people being aware of what could be potentially harming them or at risk for leaking into our waterways would help turn the tide and force companies to start using non-toxic chemicals as one first step. We certainly support legislation in Congress right now that would require all chemicals used be non-toxic, non-harmful. And then people should just know, kind of cradle to grave, what's happening to this wastewater? It comes out of the ground. Where is it going? There should be a track record of that. Is it going to a plant and then going to some other well and then going to some other well? We need to know where it's going and then the final kind of destination of it. Is it being sent to Ohio for underground wastewater disposal, which is a common occurrence these days? Is it somehow being disposed underground in Pennsylvania? Is it going to a sewage treatment plant and then to the Monongahela River? What's happening to it? And then just increasing public participation. So I think that one of the biggest questions could be the public should have a say when it comes to public lands. Polling shows that the majority of people in Pennsylvania oppose additional drilling in state forest lands. Even if they sort of don't have their minds made up on the issue in general, they don't want drilling in our state forests. And I believe it's about the same numbers for state parks. So let's take that question to the public. I think if politicians were smart, they would let the public decide and then do what the public wants. And surface owners should have more. I'm going to take your question at the end of this. I'm almost done. We believe surface owners should have more rights as well. In Colorado, where drilling has been going on for much longer, this type of drilling has been going on for much longer, there was sort of a Surface Owner Protection Act that gave surface owners who maybe don't own their gas rights more ability to control what happens on their land. The issue there is that in Pennsylvania, from 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, there's a law that severs surface rights and gas rights. So you can be the surface owner, but not necessarily own the gas layer there, for Marcellus, for Utica Shale, for other layers there, your mineral rights. And so if you do own your gas rights, you have the choice to lease them or not. If you don't own them, the gas rights trump surface rights. So a gas driller can literally come onto your land and do whatever they want, and you don't have control over that. And we believe that's something that really, really needs to be changed here in Pennsylvania. Surface owners should have more rights. And then our regulators, like DEP, like Fish and Boat Commission, like the River Basin Commissions, should just have more resources and tools to do their job. Of course, every administration is going to be kind of mired with politics, but at the very least, there should be the tools and resources for them to do their jobs. So that's everything from reviewing permits for drilling, having the time necessary to review permits thoroughly, make sure that everything's in order, to allowing health and environment officials from other departments to coordinate to also review permits to make sure that they have an input there. We haven't heard much from the health department here, and they should certainly be involved. There should be more enforcement staff on the ground to be able to do what the law doesn't require but suggests should happen, which is an inspection at basically every well, at every phase of drilling and hydraulic fracturing and plugging the well. So there's just, I think it's no secret that right now the Department of Environmental Protection does not have that staff adequate to do everything that they would ideally want to do. And we want to give them that. And then it's sort of polluter pays. If there is a spill, a leak, well pad is just not cleaned up in the way that it should be or reclaimed the way it should be, the onus should be on the driller to pay for the cost of cleanup. It should not be left on the backs of the taxpayers to pay for, as we've seen with other extractive industries. So part of that is an extraction fee or severance tax, whatever you want to call it, on the valuable resources that is removed from underneath the ground is something we believe needs to happen, with money dedicated to affected communities, whether those are places where drilling is happening, where pipelines are going in, to environmental programs to preserve certain areas and keep them off limits to drilling, and to a future fund, so that 50, 100 years from now, it's not the taxpayers paying any cost of cleanup that's needed. It's the drillers who pay the tax, and then it's preserved for the future. Stiff, well-enforced penalties is another thing. So when we're talking about multi-billion-dollar, multinational companies that are active in Pennsylvania, you might not know it by name because they own a lot of different gas companies, but it's the major gas companies and oil companies that own a couple of these different drilling companies. A $35,000 penalty is going to be a slap on the wrist and probably not encourage them to or discourage them from making the same mistake in the future in the way that a much stiffer penalty would. It will help a little bit. I mean, penalties are good, but the stiffer that they are, the larger they are, the more that I think the industry will really, really try that all levels of, or all different types of, drillers out there, the really kind of ones that are trying really hard and the ones that are not trying so hard will all be brought up to the same level. And then the entire cost of reclaiming the well, that comes into bonding. A bond is posted as insurance to, make sure that the whole area is reclaimed in the right way and that there's just insurance there, so if the company dissolves, if they skip out of town, whatever happens, that money is there to pay for the cost of cleanup. Right now, the bond that's posted is $2,500 per well. It's because the Oil and Gas Act has not been updated since 1982 or 3, I believe, and that would be enough to cover a shallow gas well, but not a Marcellus shale gas well. So I know that I think everyone agrees that needs to be increased, and that's something we're working on as well. So I can get into a little bit of kind of what's happening on the ground right now if people are interested. We only have about 40 minutes left, and there are a couple of different presentations I wanted to get into, shorter ones, but I would be willing and happy to take some questions right now if people have them. Yeah?
I just want to make sure that I have the right picture. There's 5,000 wells already, and that's just on public lands, or is that 5,000
statewide total?
And then there were 9,000 leases sold. Does that include? Is that just public lands, or that's total?
Total, yeah.
Okay. And so, do you know how many well leases were sold on public lands? If you break out for public lease price.
I don't, and I'm not even sure. Someone correct me if they know this. I'm not even sure if the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources is able to get us that. Ralph, do you know?
They don't even know.
Okay.
First of all, they don't have about 15% of the removal rights on public lands. The state forest. The state game lands is a whole different story. State game lands, they don't have 85% of removal rights. And so those are pretty much gone. The state forest, over the years, they've leased since 1947 for shallow well gases, and that ties up these companies in the buildings that drill there. So that takes a lot of percentage of public lands away. And then the Rendell administration released the numbers of big tracts of state forest land. So the total is 40% at least of state forest land now is available for development.
That's exactly right, because they can't tell how many of the private areas on public, the privately owned areas on public lands have been leased or not. They only know what they control. So, in the back. No, you.
What's the productive life of a well? And what do they do? Do you cap it at the end?
Yeah, the idea is that they cap it. I think that what I heard when I first was learning about this issue was it could be 9 or 10 years. But what we're really seeing is it spikes up and then it drops off precipitously. So it could be as short as 4 or 5 years at this point, which is why, an impact fee, that's really what legislators are looking at. If an impact fee taxes at a very low, or a severance tax or whatever it is, has a very low rate for the first 5 years and then goes up and taxes a lot, well, the well could be, depleted at that point. So, the other thing is, once a well's in place, it can be capped, and then if they decide they want to drill down to a different layer, like the Utica shale layer, they could come in and hydraulically fracture it again. So the life of the kind of well pad and the area could be dormant for a while and then be active again.
The diagram showed the drill coming down and making the turn, but then what do they do? Drill straight down and then pipe it out? You hear about these casings and steel casings and
Yep.
concrete casings, is that real?
So if this is, you see the water table, I can't really reach it, but the water table is very shallow, very close to the surface. All the way through the water table down far below it is supposed to be a casing, you should say is a casing, it's required, a cement casing. I am not an expert at exactly what it's made up of, the technical details, but I know there's supposed to be several layers of casing that are the thickest around the water table. Where we've seen problems has been where there's been just, again, human error, casings that have not been installed properly or they leak. The question that we have is, over time, 50 years from now, is that cement casing going to hold up? And we're very nervous about that. We're yet to see. It's been not enough time since a new rule passed and has gone into effect that requires better casing procedures and just kind of groundwater pollution prevention procedures. Just went into effect. We called it the Chapter 78 as part of Chapter 78 rule. But hopefully that does prevent some future cases of groundwater pollution. I think you had that next question.
Actually, I have two questions. My first one is there a known percentage of wells drilled to accidents and spills that have happened? And of the spills that have happened, you listed off some fairly toxic chemicals. Under the Hazardous Materials Act, are those chemicals a reportable quantity? I mean, do they have to report to the government if a spill occurs? And if they do, is there a certain percentage of volume that they're allowed to spill without reporting, or does any spill have to be reported?
I'll start with your first question first. We don't know the number of, we haven't taken the time to compile the number of known spills and leaks versus wells drilled. But what we have done, and you're kind of getting a preview of this, I compiled, we're about to release next week, the ratio of violations, and then specifically environmental violations, to number of wells drilled. We found out that out of more than 4,000 wells drilled, let's see what's the exact number, I don't know if I have it there, more than 4,000 wells drilled, there were more than 3,000 violations, but more than 2,000, so close to 4,000, but more than 2,000 violations out of 4,000 wells drilled that could have some effect on the environment. So that's what we found. And we'll have more information on our website as that report is released, so you can really dig in and see, by company, who are the best actors, who are the worst actors over a period of 4 years. That's between 2008 and 2011. When it comes to hazardous materials, federal law exempts hydraulic fracturing from a lot of these federal rules. So aspects of the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, toxics, some of the toxics, hazardous materials acts, there's just not a lot of reporting that's required that is required of other industries. So
basically, if another industry was carrying benzene down the highway, for instance, and had an accident and spill, they would be required to call the chemical control companies. But if a fracking company is out in the woods near a stream and they have the same spill, they're not required to report that spill? They're required to report that spill to DEP. Okay. They're required to report that spill to DEP for sure. I think it's within 24 hours, but I could be wrong. And if they don't, they'll get penalized, and some of the penalties we saw were because of that. Yeah. So that is required. Okay. But when it comes to the toxic materials that are used underground, there's not. The same rules don't apply to there as they do to underground injection when it's used specifically for waste disposal. We think it should.
because some of that waste, some of the weight, the toxic material does remain underground
And just
forever.
one other quick question. During the fracking process, is it just the head pressure of the well that causes the fracturing, or do they actually pressurize that well?
They pressurize
They
it,
do pressurize it?
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So right now, the wastewater is trucked to Ohio, where I understand there is a treatment plant that can possibly or does handle it, but there's permits submitted to the part of Pennsylvania Northwest or Southwest where there's about 10 permits or 9 permits for new treatment plants to take care of this wastewater. Is that right?
there are a lot of different places it's going. In some places, so I think the ideal situation would be underground injection, where they take an old abandoned well or they take some other, deep well injection and just inject it underneath the ground and leave it there.
Do we have that many wells like that in Pennsylvania? I know
We
they
don't
do that
have-
in Ohio.
We don't have the
and it
ability.
possibly cause an earthquake.
We don't have the topography and the geology here, which I'm not expert at, but as such that it makes it difficult for a lot of those in Pennsylvania.
That would be a problem for them to put it in our old abandoned
In
wells.
most places, but in some areas, there are proposals to make
And
that
that's
happen.
allowed.
Yeah, it's
To put
allowed.
the wastewater in our abandoned wells.
Yes, if they get their appropriate permits and kind of go through jump through the hoops, it
Or
is
empty coal
essentially
mines or
legal.
something.
I don't know if it's empty coal mines. It's they have to get a special permit to be able to inject it. It's more common in Ohio. It's easier to do it in Ohio, so that's happening more. In some cases, I think that there are plants that are built and have been built. I believe there's one along the Susquehanna River that is meant to treat this water and treat it. It's much more expensive, but treated much more fully than a sewage treatment plant ever could. So in some places it's
So
going
where's
there.
that plant on the Susquehanna River? Do you know?
I believe it was being built outside of Williamsport. Is it up and running?
It's
Three in Williamsport. Yeah.
There's a few around, they produce, some of them producing distilled water, but there's a heavy stream of brine that's left over, it's more concentrated toxic, that's what goes to Ohio.
Okay. And then there are minimal treatment plants. There are treatment plants that treat it minimally for reuse. There's an old Sony plant out near New Kensington, outside of Pittsburgh, that can be trucked to. I took a tour of it. They minimally treat it, they take out the solids, and then truck it back to be used again. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit to the reality of the oversight and enforcement situation?
Sure. I'm not there on the ground, so, we can only get what we can sort of piece together from those who are doing the enforcement. But it's our understanding that in some rural areas, the people who are meant to be doing the enforcement are doing the best they can. They're getting every way they can. But they're just, they're in charge of, say, all of a county in northwestern Pennsylvania. And with the number of wells that are popping up, they're only able to get to a place to a well like every month, rather than as every step of the process. So it's hard to know exactly what the number is. We don't have data on it, so that's the problem there. We can only hear from people who are experiencing it on the ground and saying, here's my experience with dealing with the enforcement staff, and then the enforcement staff themselves. What we do know is the problem that we identify as a disconnect. So if you have a problem, if you experience a problem and you're a neighbor of a well site and you call DEP and you say, can you send someone out here, I think there's a problem, I smell something funny, they'll send someone who's an expert from the Oil and Gas Bureau, but might not be an air expert and might not have the appropriate technology to do air testing. And then the air quality concerns come and they go. So you need someone right there on the spot, and that's where there's this disconnect where, we think ideally there should be bureaus working together a little bit more cohesively, since it's not just a water quality issue, it's also an air issue, it's also quality of life issue. So, yeah, you had a question.
I could respond to that a little bit. DEP did not have enough people to handle the factory farms questions, the landfill questions, and one landfill violated for 10 months the rules. It was a $2,500 fine per day. They did it for 10 months. DEP fine was $6,000. which is the cost of doing business. They have added lots of people for the Marcellus drilling, but they still don't have enough. They go to landfills once a month and check. The other 29 or 30 days of the month, nobody's there to see. Landfill people have pickups, waste stations, and delivery to the landfill. The same guy is doing all of that, so nobody knows. And I'm sure that they do not have a capability of all of these wells. There's just no way for them to have enough capability. And the reason you are so important, and the reason the grassroots people are so important, is because if you are not talking to DEP, if grassroots people are not talking to DEP, we'll get approved. I mean, they will find a way for it to get through. You have to, in your area, you have to have an organized group so that you avoid these just routine approvals. We fought a landfill that way, and we had better data than DEP or the landfill owner had, and were able to stop it. But the first meeting we had, they didn't take a note, they didn't write anything down, and somebody called them on it, and they said, well, we'll take the notes when we go back to the office. But they were planning on approving it. And DEP is not, I mean, there are good people there, they're working hard, but they can't do it without you folks doing it.
I second that. Yeah, did you have something else?
3 days ago, I was able to meet in the office of Tom Marino face to face, and
Is he with one of the,
Sorry?
Where is he?
he's from Williamsport, and he is a member of Congress.
Oh, Tom Marino, of course.
Marino,
I was
yeah.
thinking DEP, yeah.
So, and essentially, he said there's no proof that the gas wells in Dimmock are the result, that the water wells in Dimmock are the result of hydraulic fracturing. And moreover, now this is what he's telling me. So I'm listening to everything we're saying so far and saying Tom Marino would shrug. He used to go to his grandfather's farm and they used to light the water on fire there. So much for Josh Fox's little illustration in gaslighting. And just a couple days ago, the Republicans were at work undermining whatever the DEP was finding. So we could keep the pressure on the DEP, but Josh Fox was taken out in handcuffs from that hearing. So where now? How do we deal with the legislators?
Well, that's a perfect segue, because I was going to get to that
Because I was
in the next
afraid we
section.
were just going to keep talking about this. And
No, thank you. I did want to respond to something that the gentleman in the back said, which is that people power, grassroots speaking is very important. It's also important to be the eyes and the ears. So if you live in an area that is going to be or is currently heavily drilled, being the eyes and the ears in place of DEP is helpful. And in the ideal world, there'd be a scenario set up so that people on the ground could have an actual partnership with DEP. They could rely on one another, like was done in the past, for water quality monitoring and that type of thing, and doesn't exist anymore. And if people are interested in learning more about that, Pasa is also co-sponsoring a session similar to this, except it's all about how to be a citizen steward, how to be a monitor of your local waterway. It's being held by Mountain Watershed Association, and the next one's coming up in Lawrence County.
And they're here this weekend. So
Oh, okay, they're here.
Saturday at 8:30, Mountain Watershed Association will do a training on basic visual assessment, how to use your 5 senses to identify issues that are a result of the industry. And then Saturday at 3:10, there's a workshop called Monitoring Water Quality in the Marcellus region. That's a training to do chemical monitoring, to test for dissolved solids, to identify strategic areas in your watershed that you want to keep an eye on. And that's led by Julie Bastien from Penn College. So those are both workshops that probably would help you to respond to the issues that you're bringing up.
Exactly, and so Mountain Watershed Association, Dickinson College, their alarm program or
Yeah.
office and Trout Unlimited are all running similar types of trainings to allow people to do that. If you're out on a river, if you're out in the water all the time, you might as well be helping to test the water and know what to look for. And it won't necessarily hold up in court if you want to present this in court and if a lawsuit's being filed. But what it can do is raise the red flag to bring DEP out there or to bring the right person out there to get the tests on the record or the pollutants on the record to be able to take the appropriate legal action if that's what needs to happen.
But you do have to have the record, you do have to know how to do it.
Yes.
And do it exactly right, because if you do a test and there's some slight error in it, they just.
Exactly. So you need to get
You
trained.
have to do the whole work accordingly.
Yeah, I'm going to take one more question or two more questions and then move on.
Very quickly, before you move on to the next topic, is there any effort at the state or federal level to increase the number of inspectors for these wells? I mean, it sounds like the inspection and the oversight is sorely shorthanded.
A couple of years ago, as was mentioned, the DEP was able to raise permit fees, which helped to put in several more staff in the northeastern part of the state, I think in Williamsport. But we think that if a severance tax went into place, a significant portion should be directed back into DEP's offices for, and be earmarked specifically for more inspectors.
So there aren't actually currently more people being trained to do this?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that we would hear that if DEP were doing that, so. And Ralph, did you have one last comment?
Just so people get a picture, of all the wells drilled, the 5,000 drilled so far, less than half have been fracked. For economic reasons, they don't invest that money, so they don't put gas in the pipeline, sometimes they do it to get paid. But the DEP is not informed when a well is being fracked, it's just not part of the process. And they send out inspectors randomly, but that's an important phase where we'd like to see people on site. But, if you do report a problem, if there is a problem, then the DEP is very good about repeated visits and they follow up very well. They have to know something's wrong.
So again, citizen stewardship.
Citizen stewardship. So let's, real quick.
So yeah, real quick, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Charlie Cradaville, Food and Water Watch. In 1 hour, I'm going to be doing a presentation might be useful. It's called Community Organizing, Trainings and Tools for Winning
Perfect.
Campaigns. We'll be doing a fracking example with a role play. It should be fun. So
Perfect.
That's room 218 in 1 hour.
That's great. And that's a perfect segue because this is a little bit on citizen advocacy. So they tie well together. Okay, so I'm going to get to the question of, you know this information, you maybe are concerned. You probably all know different things than I do, especially, the people who are kind of live right in the area or have the gas well near them and have done the research on their local area know different things than I do. So that's what's perfect about this and why the more people who are interested in getting involved should get involved. So I'm going to talk to you about, if you want to be a citizen advocate, if you want to just get more comfortable with the skill of talking to a leader, here are the basics on how to do that. What I'm going to do is pass around the takeaway from the last section, so you can have that in case you want to remember some of the things I said. But then I also have handouts for these next few sections so that you can take them before you leave. But I'm going to hold off for passing them around until I finish. So what is advocacy? I think people mostly think advocacy is strictly lobbying. It's not necessarily lobbying. It's sort of a whole process of pushing for what you want with a certain decision maker. And it's just part of the process of convincing a decision maker at any level to support your position on an issue. So that's a short-term goal. In the longer term, you want to continue a relationship with them. You want to build credibility with them by doing a set of things, build your access with them so that you can call their office and they'll give you a call back, and build your influence with them so that they actually do listen to you. And then you want them to know who you are and if you have a small local group, who your group is and what they do, respect your involvement and your expertise. That happens over the long term as well. It's not going to happen just after one meeting. So as a citizen, you have a clear advantage over someone like me who's a registered lobbyist and I meet with a whole set of legislators. You're a constituent, you're hopefully a voter, and so you're in their district. The question comes up, well, what if I didn't vote for them? What if they know I'm from the opposite party? Well, then you have to do a little bit of work extra to make sure that the people who they know did vote for them or are from their political party are sort of there with you to meet with them. So that helps build your credibility. It's a, then it's a nonpartisan thing. It's just a whole concern. But don't let that stop you from meeting with your legislator, even if you know that they're, not from not the person that you voted for. You both have a connection to the community, so I can do all the research I want on Erie, but I'm never going to have that same connection that a constituent from Erie has, knowing what's going on every single day and being from there. And so that gives you some experience and expertise. I think the best meetings that I go to are ones that include a constituent, a well-informed constituent. It helps me, it helps them, it's the ideal situation. So I'm just going to go through some quick principles. If you have a strong opinion, it's sometimes hard to just rein it in and be, really respectful, but you have to be if you're going to get your word across. Because as soon as you're disrespectful, as soon as you see the thing, they're just going to shut down and stop listening to you. So you always, no matter what you think their position is, treat them with respect, be professional. Sort of goes without saying, but it's always good to remind people. Be confident. So if you know that you collected a bunch of petitions or polling shows something in their district, you can be confident about what you know your friends and neighbors think about an issue. But you don't want to get into an argument with a legislator or with some sort of leader about what their district thinks and feels, because they have their finger on the pulse too. So you don't want to go in and say, I know what your constituents think. They think this. Well, that might not go too well. Will go over too well with them because they're keeping up with that as well. They have people who keep up with that, and they know where their folks stand, especially as an election is coming. So it's fine to demonstrate that there's a lot of broad-based support for something that you believe in. That's fine, because that's showing them that there is more support than they even know of. And then just in general, not burning long-term bridges over a short-term issue. I think it's easier said than done. It's easier for a group like ours to do that because we work on so many issues that, look, hey, if we're never going to agree on this one issue, I'm not going to do something or say something that prevents me from getting into their office for a meeting in the future, because maybe in the future we'll be on the same page on energy efficiency standards or, wind power or something like that. On this issue, you just never want to say the thing that's going to prevent you from getting in, or do the thing that's going to prevent you from getting access with them in the future. There are certain things that are just going to, I think you can imagine what you could say or do that could prevent that. So there are just 5 main keys. You want to prepare ahead of time if you're going to meet with them. Learning all you can about the issue, about what your point is. Building a relationship with them over the long term, and within the meeting itself. Not just talking solely about the issue, but kind of learning who they are and what drives them. Because learning what motivates that person is your key to making sure that you can get them to vote the right way. You want to not just tell them your problems and what your concerns are, but give them real good reasons for answers to the problems, proposed answers to the problems or solutions to the problems, and really well thought out reasons for why they should support that. This is something that's often forgotten, but you want to make a direct ask, like, will you vote for this thing next week? In the legislature right now, I was on the phone all morning with different legislative offices to try to stop a bill in Harrisburg that would prevent local municipalities from making their own decisions about Marcellus shale and zoning there. And, I had to say, to the legislative directors, will you ask your boss? Will your boss make phone calls to these 5 senators to make sure that they're on board? I had to say that, spell it out, because otherwise they kind of, wishy-washy. Oh yeah, I'm sure that they're good. You should, just trust us. We got it. You have to actually make the ask. And then follow up. If you're in a meeting or you're on a phone call, follow up to make sure that they did it, or follow up to answer any questions that were left. So, we'll walk through these. Providing information. You want to give them information about you and the problem at hand. If it's this issue, if it's Marcellus shale, you can kind of walk through, for instance, the points that I gave you, or others that you're really concerned about. And not just that, but it's really important to have thought out ahead of time, either by working with someone like me, who we've come up with sample policy solutions and we sort of are following that, or by working among yourselves to figure out what is the best answer that would make sense for this level of government to address this problem. Because they'll be more likely to take that and then use it if you outline your asks. And then be ready to know what the opposition is probably going to say and be ready to rebut that with good facts. You also want to gather information. You just want to listen to them. And I think a good lobby meeting should be talking 50% of the time and listening 50% of the time. So you can pick up a lot of things just by listening and asking good questions. Their political analysis on the situation, maybe some insider information, more about what they're hearing. So what are you hearing on this issue? Maybe they'll tell you straight out that exactly what the opposition is saying so that you know it for the next meeting you have to go to or for the future. Or just finding out who they are. And then what their larger intentions are on this issue, kind of what their position is and where you need to chip away at it, maybe. And then their agenda outside of this, because maybe there are ways that you can build inroads to them on other issues that you both agree on, and you can kind of build your relationship that way. And then again, get a commitment. Make a compelling and direct ask. Senator Costa, will you make sure that you and your caucus vote against this bill if it includes this provision? I'm asking you. We're really counting on you, so that you know where they stand before you leave the meeting. And sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes you have to ask a couple of times, but and there are times where you'll never get an answer. They're just going to hedge, but you really want to try. And then follow up immediately if you need to get back to them on any questions that were asked.
That would include if they didn't vote for the way that you wanted to.
Yes.
Back to them saying, I'm really disappointed.
Yes.
After our meeting.
Yeah, and here's a perfect key. I wouldn't do that unless you've actually met with them and asked them ahead of time. It's unfair to penalize them for something that you never actually directly asked them to do. So even if it's a letter to them, even if it's a phone call to their office, an email, asking them to do a certain thing and then they don't, then you have the right to really express your disappointment. But that's a perfect example of also where you wouldn't want to burn a long-term bridge. Express your disappointment, but you don't need to get so angry that it burns a long-term bridge. I'm not going to walk through this because it's in the handout, so you can read kind of just a sample how-to agenda of a meeting and what it might look like. And then materials as well. You can bring fact sheets with you, reports that you might have. If you've gotten a letter to the editor published, that's great. Any other press clips on the issue. If you've met with an editorial board, say the Washington Observer reporter that just published a really great article or editorial on this issue, you can bring it with them so that they are aware of it. Any petitions, endorser lists. But I'll leave this up there so people can see it.
Some of these on the website, because I can't type as fast as you.
I have handouts right here that
Okay, that's all in the handout.
that I'll pass out. Yeah, that's great. And then you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, because a lot of the fracking movement and shows that I'm involved with, they have big rallies to call people, you call a representative, and I was wondering how often, those messages even get sent to the representative. Call Barack Obama, tell them that fracking isn't clean energy. I was just wondering, from your insight, if that's even effective, if that even matters to legislation, or legislators, or whether or not you really have to speak to them one-on-one.
I think it helps. Everything helps. Look, you need people power to get the word across. If they are on the fence, they can use that as political cover to vote a way that maybe their party isn't, right? If they're saying, I gotta vote for this, I'm getting phone calls, I'm getting emails, I'm getting letters, I'm getting bombarded, and especially if they're looking for a re-election, and they're looking a little vulnerable, that's kind of the perfect thing to put them over the fence. I think it definitely works because they've told us. I get told for every phone call they get or email they get, it's they assume that it represents 10 other people who feel the same way. So it actually is more effective than you think. Now, are there some politicians who will just never really listen to public opinion because they don't happen to agree with it? Yes, and there's a lot of money in this game. There's a lot of campaign contributions. There's a lot of money that's exchanged hands through campaign contributions from gas companies. That doesn't help, but that's exactly why we need even more people who are active and who are meeting with them, and if they feel strongly, actually speaking out and expressing it, because otherwise they won't know. When it comes to, so this was mentioned before, when it comes to, there are some legislators or some leaders who just want to pull the wool over their eyes, or they just don't agree, like they will just never be an environmentalist, and that's who they are. Then you need to find out what makes them tick. What is the thing that is going to make their ears perk up and listen? Is it that, for some, and this is where it's been really helpful working with some local municipal officials, township supervisors and such, they realize that some people who aren't environmentalists might listen to the kind of property rights thing, and they didn't maybe understand that if you own the surface rights but not the gas rights, that the drillers can still come in and basically do whatever they want. That might get them going. If it's about surface owners not being able to control what happens on their land, that can really get some of them going. So, in the first meeting, maybe it's just finding out where they are and figuring out what is the message that's going to get through to them the best, and then brainstorming and being creative and be willing to be that person who says the thing that maybe you don't believe, but it's like I could never do this because I'm from PennEnvironment. I could never go in and say, look, I'm for drilling too, and who cares about the environment? But here's really the concern that you need to think about. But any constituent who, wants to get their message across could do that and be very influential because they're getting at it the right way.
I agree with what you're saying. If you're from an organization where it's a foregone conclusion, then they're not going to listen to you as well. I represent the United Methodist Church, and currently there's more United Methodist churches than there are U.S. post offices. But I recognize, too, that we're just minuscule compared to the Roman Catholic Church. Most denominations have very strong statements. The connection among the environment, health, economics, violence, et cetera, et cetera. So imagine if we could engage the constituency of our congregation. Right now, there's a resolution going to the United Methodist General Conference just to get people to study our social principles. And not even telling them what to think, but to engage in their communities in terms of the discussions and decisions that are happening there regarding hydraulic fracturing. So, I'm fascinated with the notion that, what if the churches would just wake up? What could we not accomplish?
I completely agree, and I think these same principles could be used at any level of government or non-government. I mean, it could be used to then convince a large, influential body to take the right position that you think could help in the long term. It could be used on the local level. It could be used in so many different ways. So, sometimes you need multiple steps to get to the ultimate decision maker, whoever you identify that to be kind of be structured and methodical about it, and who is the ultimate decision maker for my area and who I can influence. If you're a constituent of one area, you don't want to be talking to a senator from another area. They're just not going to want to hear from you unless you're like a registered lobbyist or someone. But for in your area, who is the decision maker? Okay, maybe it takes me getting the business bureau or a labor union or the firefighters union or whoever it is on board with me first. It takes these skills to get them. Then we can take it to the ultimate decision maker.
Or even hospital boards who, might have to treat somebody who's in an accident. They come in covered with chemicals, but they don't know what the chemicals are, so they don't know how to treat them. So you raise awareness among, health professionals. It's endless.
It is, and if you have limited resources, you really, like us, you have to be targeted about that. So, you don't want to be reaching out to everyone willy-nilly. You want to focus on what are the constituency groups that are going to be most influential to that given legislator or that given decision maker, and figure out who those are and then really go after them. Yeah.
would having a certain, one of these certain types of constituents, being the one to have a meeting, with these decision makers be influential? Or is there any sort of demographic that's especially influential in these sorts of meetings?
I think you have to determine that for yourself in your area. And that might be like doing some research. There's a lot of information about elected officials, so figuring out kind of what they're associated with. But, we'll partner with anyone who will partner with us. In some districts, like in Pittsburgh, if you partner with the labor community, that's great. With certain legislators, not all. Businesses create jobs. Small business owners create jobs if there's an association of them and they're willing to get on board. Or if it's an area that it relies heavily on tourism for an economic driver, knocking on, it's kind of like canvassing, like going business to business and seeing if, presenting your point, basically doing the same thing as you're doing with legislators, lobbying them and saying, hey, will you sign on, getting them to be involved and then taking them to those meetings can be really helpful too. So it's just figuring out who is that person or that group that's or multiple groups that are gonna help me the most. And I think it differs from place to place. Yeah.
The Pennsylvania Council of Churches, probably most of us know, did come out with a statement or position over a year ago. I wrote a letter to the Catholic Bishop of Harrisburg because I'm a Catholic. I wrote it last June the 18th and I have not had a response yet. Surprise.
The churches have to be careful about getting into political issues because of their tax exempt status. I mean, you have to do that carefully. The minister can't get up and say, all of you should be against fracking, because they'll call them on it. Oh, I know, they do that.
Yeah.
I think with any organization, the key is finding the venue that it can be accepted in. So if there is some some religious organizations have specific councils set up to deal with sustainability or ecology.
Every denomination except the Catholic Church has.
Okay. I wish I could help you, but I'm sure there are people out there who can. Any last questions? I think what I'm going to have to do is only hand out the section on working with media, but what it'll walk through for you is tips and tricks for writing a really great letter to the editor, because I think that's a wonderful way for a citizen to take action. You can write a letter to the editor once a month if you're doing it to different papers in your region, and getting your word out in a way that is level-headed, is smart, is funny, is readable, is something that people want to read, and it demonstrates to elected officials and decision makers and the general public outside of just your little circle what you feel on this issue and what the general consensus is. So if you can do that and get others to submit letters to the editor on this issue, wonderful way to really get more coverage on this issue. While I'm speaking about media very quickly, another easy way is to forward emails, forward articles that you read online, comment on them. The more kind of traffic that they get on this issue, the more media markets will want to write about this issue because they'll see that it's a very popular issue. So that's also helpful as well. Any last questions before we wrap up? Yes.
How do we get the media out in general? If you wanted to host a workshop or something, is it just a matter of calling them and saying, hey, we're doing this? Or
Yes, and to make it.
I haven't gotten a whole lot of success with it.
It has to be newsworthy. So think about it from a television viewer's point of view or a reader's point of view, like what makes news. And there's some things in the handout that walk through what's newsworthy. Is it local? Does it involve conflict? Is it relevant to an upcoming decision? Is there something newsworthy there? So a workshop, they came out and covered some of these workshops in the past. Because it's Marcellus shale, some media are just willing to send a photographer. But holding a press conference sometimes works if it's new information you're releasing or some new set of coalition partners coming together. We hold a press conference every time we have a new report that we're releasing, like research. If it's a huge rally, it's a huge showing of public support or a protest, call them and just give them a lot of advance notice, like a week advance notice. Give them the story, give them the details of who, what, where, when, why, but don't give away the story. You don't want to give away the thing that you're going to be announcing that day until the day of, because otherwise there's no need for them to come out and cover it. They can just write the story without actually coming out there.
Just create curiosity.
One thing we did,
Yeah.
when we were getting the group together, we got legal-size tablets and put on the head drawing of the tablet some topic about what we were dealing with. And we had about 8 of those, and we passed them around and said, if you are interested in being on this committee, put your name down. If you're interested in giving leadership to this committee, mark that. And that was our beginning. We had them, and of course we took on flyers to every home in the community, every home in the community before the meeting to get them there. And then we had them sign up on that. Right there, we had a group of committed people. And then the study we did things like how much of the trucks going to bother you going through town, how many school buses turn around on that road that the trucks are going to be coming on, and how long does it take the truck to go from the Interstate 80 to the site. And we had more information than they did in the end, but we got people, we had lawyers, we had ministers, we had doctors, we had lots of common people, farmers, whatever, and they all were interested in something. Somebody was interested in measuring how close the houses are to the road. I mean, we did that, and it made a big difference. And we didn't go away from that meeting and say, boy, I'm so frustrated about that. Can you imagine all that stuff that went on? We had a group of people, and we called those people together, and the ones who said they were in leadership, and people who indicated in leadership, we took them off the list also, picked one of them and said, you come to this meeting and there'll be the steering committee, and we were off and running.
That's great. I mean, I think part of the reason I love having these workshops is that people can learn from one another. I mean, there's no single group that's able to coordinate all the local groups that are organizing among themselves, but everyone can help one another so that you don't have to recreate the wheel and you realize there are others out there who are doing the same thing. So I hope you'll all talk to one another and ask me if you have questions. Hopefully you all got my card. Consider us a resource if you have questions about working with the media or want someone with, the expertise in what's happening in Harrisburg to join you at a legislative meeting or so on and so forth. Or just give tips on how to, reach volunteers and reach people in your town to start to organize them. And go to Charlie's event tomorrow morning.
It's actually,
Or when is it?
I was wrong, the clock is wrong actually, but 4:10 today
4:10.
at room 218.
4:10.
And about the media, I was upset because the York newspapers were not putting a lot of material in the paper, articles about our York Forum on Marcellus Shale, and Matthew Ralph Pinsburg was one of our speakers. But they sent a reporter to cover the whole event, and we were front page news the next day.
That's great.
So that's even better.
That's great.
Right.
One little tidbit of
Yeah.
information, if you're distributing flyers to your community, be careful where you leave them, because years ago, our church was distributing flyers for something, and we left some in the rural mailboxes, and you're not allowed to do that.
Do not put them in mailboxes. No. Yeah.
I just had a comment, you had been talking earlier about one of the ways that they get rid of the wastewater from the drilling is to pump it down in an old well and cap it off and seal it. And it seemed like what you were saying was like that's an acceptable way, to at least your position.
We're nervous about that. Yeah.
Because right now it's illegal.
Because the casing right now, that only really covers the shallow groundwater. It doesn't cover anything in the aquifers, and anything that's pumped down, and even what's just being, the fluid going back up and down, if it infects a deeper aquifer that starts somewhere up in the Poconos or in the middle of the state, it comes out in Maryland, it's not even coming out in the same state. It could take 1,000 years for it to come through, 250 years. So they can test water all they want, but it's not going to show the problem until it's way too late.
It's an excellent point and oversight on my part, and exactly what we feel is the concern is there's just not enough information to tell us, is it safe? What is going to happen 200 years? Right. Right. Exactly. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Last few announcements. I know I said this already. There's a discussion happening right now, or coming up next in room 208. on this particular issue, so if you want to keep talking, that's the place to go. Stop up at the Sierra Club table. You can get some of these materials and more upstairs near the art sale area. There's some more handouts if you want them.
Do you have some of your cards?
And my cards and my sign-up sheet are going around, so please take one. But
And if you have these little extra evaluations, they're just helpful for me to share, within Pasa.